Welcome, everyone, to the CSM Mastermind. I'm Andrew Marks, co-founder of Success Hacker and our success coaching training program. We're back for our monthly live webcast today talking about sharing customer feedback effectively. This free learning event is brought to you by Success Coaching, the world leader in customer success professional development training, with we're so close to 13,000 students on our platform globally. Our training programs are available in a variety of formats, from self-paced online learning to virtual instructor-led boot camps. Last week, we launched the spring cohorts for our 12-week coaching program that is now being delivered in conjunction with the University of San Francisco. We also have a growing number of standalone courses taught by industry experts, including data-driven decision-making, which, by the way, launches next week. And we have both open seats and a coupon code that Ashley's going to drop into chat. We also have having difficult conversations, both for customer success as well as customer support folks, change management for customer success, outcome-based selling, and what successful managers do, a 12-week management training and coaching program that kicks off our new customer success leadership training track. Find out more about our training programs at successcoaching.co, and Ashley will also drop the link into chat. For those of you who haven't participated in one of these before, this is a live and unscripted discussion where we dig into a single topic relevant to customer success. Regardless of the company that you work for, the scope of your role, or the sizes of the customers that you deal with, we aim to pick topics that are going to be practical and useful to you. The schedule for our upcoming events can also be found at successcoaching.co. Click on the events tab at the top of the page to find out more. Also, reach out to us if you've got an idea for a topic or if you'd like to participate as a panelist in one of these events. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar is recorded. We'll be posting a replay along with a transcription on our website early next week. We will be taking questions later on during the webinar, so please use that Q&A button found at the bottom of your screen to ask or upvote a question. We're also broadcasting on LinkedIn Live and have somebody monitoring that feed. So if you have questions, please post them there and they'll be relayed to us. Also, please keep all commentary to the chat window. Commentary to the chat window, Q&A, use Q&A for questions. There's a lot of thought leadership out there, along with a lot of theories about how to deliver customer success. In this series, we focus on practical real-world advice, best practices, techniques, and shared experiences from those practicing customer success on a daily basis. And to do that, we invite three panelists to join me for a roundtable discussion. These are people who are great at their craft, and we ask them to share their experiences and their perspectives. And these are three people that I've known for quite a while in customer success, so I'm excited to speak with them. So without further ado, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves to y'all, talk a bit about who they are and what they do, and let's get started as usual in alphabetical order with Alex.
Best part about having an A name, you go first.
Exactly.
Hello, everyone. Excited to be here. Good afternoon, morning, or middle of the night. It looks like we've got people from all over. I'm coming to you from the Bay Area. I have managed and led CS departments for about the last 10 years. Currently, I'm the VP of Customer Success at Xtracker, which provides software for commercial construction companies. I got into customer success by accident while trying to run a sales team that did not work well for a small company, but kind of happened on this idea of, hey, what happens after people sign up? It really fits my skill set, so I've been focused on that ever since. I also curate a weekly customer success newsletter, originally called it's called the Customer Success Newsletter because I'm very creative at names. So you can find me at there or at Xtracker. And most of my experience is going to be with products or services that target SMB or mid-market customers. The companies I've been at have also been from around 0 to 25 million in revenue. So that's kind of my frame of reference for a lot of the advice I'll be giving. So smaller customers and earlier stage companies. But I'm really excited for this topic because I see this as one of the most valuable things customer success does. We facilitate the voice of the customer. I've spent a lot of time putting programs into place around this for gathering, organizing, and acting on feedback, whether it's feature requests, NPS surveys, things like that. So I'll try and give some actionable ideas and thoughts around this topic, but excited to get going.
Awesome. Thanks, Alex. And Alex, we've known Alex for a long time. He's been a longtime friend of Success Hacker and Success Coaching, going way back to those days when we were just getting started. So I'm glad to have you part of the program. Sherry, you're up.
Thank you. Excuse me. Hi, everybody. I am Sherry Srebnick. I'm coming in hot from New York. Literally, it's 60 degrees here on the East Coast right now. I was formerly the head of client success for the US at Searchmetrics, and I am now on day 2 as in my new role as principal analyst at Forrester Research. And I am part of the B2B post-sale engagement team focusing on customer success. So this is super exciting. For those of you that don't know, Forrester Research is probably one of the most influential research and advisory firms out there. And one of their biggest value propositions is being able to help not only just leaders in general using customer obsession, which is why we're all here, to accelerate growth and really put the customer at the center of everything they do. So I'm super excited to be able to give a voice to CS from the research perspective.
Awesome. Thanks, Sherry. And once again, congratulations on the new role. I know it's super hard to get into Forrester. So kudos to you for landing that new gig.
Thank you. I appreciate it. They hire less than 1% of the people that apply. So that's pretty exciting.
That's awesome.
You knew you would
You're better than 99% of those out there.
I mean, of course.
And finally, thanks, Sherry. And finally, Steve.
And fine, that's always the way I'm introduced.
Yeah, well,
right?
you're ST, man. You're ST.
Yeah,
you're at the end of the list. I'm sorry.
That's all good. I come at this more from a customer feedback perspective, which I guess is why I'm here. So I'm one of the founders here at Waypoint Group with our TopBox software products supporting this kind of feedback process. We started the company, just as a little bit of background, 13 years ago now. And as there were several of us that left Sapmetrics. Some people might know Sapmetrics.
They have something to do with NPS?
They had something to do with NPS, yeah. So Sapmetrics was the company that did all the research and science behind the Net Promoter System, the Net Promoter Score, the book, all that research. We did that, kind of the R&D, and brought it to market with Fred Reichheld and Bain. But the thing I just really want to emphasize here is that was consumer research, right? There were the 22 different consumer industries that we studied where we had the data, and B2B, so different, right? So, CEOs read the book and got excited about it, and that's great. But what they should get excited about is the system, not the score. There's so many differences in B2B versus B2C that I'm sure we're going to get into. So I'm super excited to be here to address some of that.
Awesome. Yeah, Steve, I invited you on purpose. We have a couple of practitioners, and then we've got a subject matter expert like yourself. So, and last time that Steve and I talked on one of my Moments of Truth webcasts, you taught me something. I'm always learning. I'm always learning from you. Every time you and I talk, Steve, I learn something. Now I'm not saying I don't learn something from Alex and Sherry, but I'm always learning something from you, Steve. So I'm excited to have you here. Once again, we all appreciate, myself and everybody else on this webcast appreciate your time. Now let's get to the topic. The impacts of sharing customer feedback, both internally and externally, are monumental. Internally, capturing and sharing customer feedback with other teams helps those that are farther away from the customer understand the impact that your offering is having on your customer base. It helps them better understand the challenges that customers are still facing, and if done right, provide context to the various requests that customers make. It also promotes this culture of outside-in thinking, which is paramount to evolving to or sustaining a customer-centric mindset. Externally, closing the loop with customers on the feedback being provided signals to your customer base that you're listening to them, that you care about what's important to them, and as a result, you're more likely to get additional feedback in the future and deliver a product that meets their needs and expectations. So, to get us started on this conversation, let's dig a bit deeper into the benefits of capturing customer feedback and doing it in the right way. Who's got something to say about that?
I think we all have a lot to say, myself, that is including myself. There are really a ton of benefits from collecting customer information. And it's not just for customer success practitioners. It's, information that can be disseminated and shared and used by your sales team, by your marketing team, by your product team, even by your executive team. But I think where people can tend to go wrong with it is that there's a lack of proper planning behind it. Like they have the right thoughts in mind, and we know we need to use it. But how do we even start? Where do we start? How do we deploy? What do we use? So I think properly planning is a big piece. But then what are your objectives? Like understanding what you want to learn is huge, and identifying that. I would say, what are you prepared to do with the information you collect? Right? I think that's a huge piece of it. And also, like, what decisions will this information help you validate or make? And those are 3 key points that I like to think about before we embark on getting feedback and sharing it broadly.
Why do I need a plan? I want to survey my customers. My objective is to figure out if they think we suck or not, and I want to sell more product. I mean, it seems
what
pretty simple.
Customers? What customers? Which ones?
I don't know. Does it matter?
What segment? What persona?
Yeah, I maybe I can jump in with a little bit of sort of the why too, if you don't mind. I can't help myself. The why do this? I mean, there's lots of benefits that people talk about in terms of, driving retention and accelerating expansion. But I think it really comes down to 2 things in terms of the why we should be focusing on this in customer success. The first is stronger relationships with your individual accounts, right? And I shouldn't say. I hate the word customer. There's 2 words I really hate. Customer, because it's so ambiguous. We don't really know if we're talking about the account or the contacts or the buyer or an end user, right? So it's very vague. So customer feedback, we should be careful about. The other word I hate is survey, especially in B2B, because look, I don't know who wants to take a survey. No, nobody wants to take a survey, but
let's do a survey.
Yeah. Well, Oprah says people want to be heard. I couldn't believe I'm
You just quoted Oprah?
I just quoted Oprah.
That's awesome.
Oprah, right? She is the professional she's one of my heroes, I guess. So, but people do want to be heard. And it's not like consumer where you can okay, I didn't like that hotel, so I'm going to go to a different hotel next time. It's, there's a relationship there. They got to make it work. And as an author of this book, Failure Sucks, more for your customers than for you, it does suck. If things don't work for them, it's way worse for them than for you, right? Because they bet their career on it. They got to make it work. It's their job, et cetera. So anyway, I diverged on the survey topic. So I said the generic kind of retention and expansion everybody gets. But when you really focus on feedback and listening to people, stronger customer relationships with all the right people, we all can understand what that means. It means easier. It means they don't ghost you. It means that they're going to come back for more, right? And the second thing is, pardon the expression, but kind of get the sand out of the Vaseline, right? We need a well-oiled machine inside the company. So you gotta get people on the same page. You can't ask people to align to your strategy. Marketing can't, it's hard to get people to come to your side. But if we align to the customer, the account, the contacts, right, a little bit easier, right? So if we have good, trustworthy feedback that is really representative of what our customers are saying, it's hard to go away from that, right? It just makes things easier inside the company in terms of driving the right improvements. That's kind of been my perspective. But Alex, maybe you have
what do you got to add to this, Alex? Besides the whole we're gonna park the get the sand out of Vaseline analogy, because I really want to understand that, but go for it, Alex.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't have any good quotes like that or any good analogies like that, but to me it's your competitive advantage as a company. It's the thing that you have that your competitors don't. And if you define, like I know Success Hacker does, if you define customer success as delivering your customers' desired outcomes in a way that's, that they want, in the experience that they want, It's just the ability to figure out how you can better deliver those desired outcomes or what new desired outcomes you can add. So at the core of what customer success is, feedback is integral to delivering those desired outcomes and understanding the experience customers want. And yeah, like I said, it's your competitive moat. Like if you can capture, utilize, organize, and then implement the feedback from your customers, that's just going to help you increase retention. That'll help you capture more customers, develop better profiles. It also helps you as a company be more efficient. I'm sure everyone in customer success knows, don't touch the engineers. Maybe that's my quote. Don't bother engineering, don't bother product, because they need to be laser focused. Well, if they're your bottleneck of resources, you got to make sure that they're working on the appropriate things. Now, that's more of a tech, SaaS approach, but I think that holds for other companies as well. So I think this is, like I said in my intro, one of the most critical things that customer success provides, which is the voice of the customer. And that's at every stage of a company. If you're early on, later on, if you're small enterprise. So this is the one thing you don't want to get wrong, I would say, because it leads to everything else.
I love that. First of all, I love your competitive moat. It's so important, right? To keep one step ahead of the competition. But also, and Alex, you are a student of the smaller size kind of growing startup. When you at least from my experience, and I've been involved in very early stage startups, you throw something out there to see if it sticks. You throw something out there to figure out, is this, I've got this inkling that there's something out there that is going to be a viable play. Getting that customer feedback and starting that feedback loop is super important in the early stages of a company. So you can validate the assumptions that you made and then begin to evolve what your offering is to that growing customer base that you are hopefully developing.
Yeah, and this might sound a little, maybe not controversial, but when you're in an earlier stage company, say, 0 to 5 million, unfortunately, this is my opinion, customer success isn't the most important department at that point. Because you're still figuring out, like you said, what's the product, whose needs does it solve? Can we grow? Can we add customers? But customer success plays a super critical part of that point, which is validating the product, validating the prospects, the pain, and things like that. And then you're building the foundation, because at a certain point of growth, customer success does become the most important department, in my opinion. Early on, you gotta sell, but you get to a point where your customers are your revenue, are your business, and you better have built that foundation along the way.
Couldn't agree more. I would like to add, when you're looking at customer feedback, a lot of people look at the aggregate, right? We're looking at cohorts, like, okay, so what are our strategic accounts thinking? Or what are all of our customers thinking, right? Or what are small customers, or split by persona? What are decision makers thinking? But I mean, that's good, but in customer success, take action at the account level, right? So I would say super, super important to understand where the power center is, who's contributing or influencing buying and renewal decisions, right? Expansion and renewal decisions. You've got an existing customer with a champion, hopefully, that is going to be, hopefully, your advocate. And if you can position this effectively with your champion that says, look, we're all about listening. We're all about acting on your feedback. If you give me, if we can get this understanding of all the right people inside your company about what's working and what's not working, I'm committed as your customer success manager, right, to listen to you, address what you're telling us. Maybe we have a solution. Maybe we can provide workarounds. Maybe we can provide documentation. Maybe it's a feature enhancement. There's a variety of different ways that you can address it, but you can totally do that at the account level, where right, because you've asked in advance, who are the people that we should be getting feedback from? Listen to those people at scale and drive the account level motion. That will give you an easy ability to roll it up across a cohort, right? And then look for those recurring patterns across those accounts. It's far easier in my experience.
And I'm going to jump in too, to piggyback on something that Steve was saying, because first of all, I want to be clear, of course, you want sentiment around a product, right? But it doesn't have to be about the product all the time. And again, are you talking to the right people? So for example, and in fact, Steve and I partnered on a small kind of pilot that I did last summer where we were looking to get customer sentiment post onboarding. How did they feel about that process? Again, yeah, sure, it's your product, but did we as a CS team, did we give them the right tools? Did we build the right plan? How did they feel coming out of that? What was that experience like for them, especially if we say, the renewal starts at onboarding? What was that initial experience on the post-sale side like? And is there ways to improve it? And then another place to capture sentiment, those listening posts along the journey is like, say, the 6-month mark. And I don't mean in June, I mean 6 months between when their contract renewed or started to the end. It should have nothing to do with the renewal because that's separate. How do they feel 6 months in? And are you getting that not just from the end users? Are you talking, like I said, to Steve's point, the different personas? What about the buyer, the executive sponsor? How do they feel? Because that's a great place to uncover a situation early enough to be able to mitigate risk, where the end users could be clapping their hands and saying, you're great, but your budget you're a budget holder or executive sponsor, and they may be the same person, may not feel the same way. So that can nix your renewal. So I want to be clear that customer sentiment is not just about the product itself. It's about the experience and the relationship.
And just to really double down on what you're saying, the context is everything. I guess there's a third thing I hate. I'm sorry I'm being so critical, right? We talked about a customer and survey, but these quarterly or annual survey blasts, you lose all that context, right? Where is the customer in their life cycle? Is this really the right time to be getting feedback from them? What are we getting feedback about? Just a generic recommend question? What am I supposed to do with that, right? So be very focused on the context of the feedback. Where are they in the life cycle? Is this the right time? When is the right time? Who are they? Are they a decision maker? Or are they an end user? Or are they somewhere in between? Are we asking the right questions of those people? You can't, don't you dare ask a decision maker, what do you think of our support, for example, right? They got better things to do and they're not interacting with support. So there's a lot of examples around context that are so important in asking the right questions of the right people at the right time.
Yeah, too true. You need to be aware of who you're asking and when you're asking. I agree with you. The annual NPS blast, which I'll admit, when I first got into this, I have no formal SAT metrics training. I had no formal NPS training. I had broad brushstroke overview of it, and we're talking. This is 14 years ago when I launched one of the early customer success teams out there. We just said, okay, let's take half of our customers and survey them this half of the year and the other half this half of the year. There's a lot more to it. There's a lot more nuances to it than that.
But the good news is there's also a lot of new technologies that fully enable it. I mean, I think the customer success platforms are starting to catch up. I mean, the feedback hasn't necessarily been their forte, but there's so many other tools, including our own, that are really all about able to automate that end-to-end life cycle and help drive the right analytics and visualizations reporting. So yes, it sounds daunting, but the tools have caught up.
Yeah, for sure. I love so by the way, I have no problem you pitching your tools or your book. So, I'm if you're here, I value your opinion and all the other stuff that comes along with that. So what do you do if your company? I mean, we all get it, right? And hopefully our audience gets that. What do you do if your company doesn't understand this? I mean, how do you communicate this? How do you demonstrate it? What thoughts do you have of how do we get people to really grok what we're talking about? Why this is important?
I'd say, like anything else, as someone who has fought that battle, and somewhat recently, at the end of the day, tie it back to dollars and revenue. And it really depends. First of all, it depends on your audience, but at the end of the day, any executive, we're looking at revenue, whether you're looking at just gross retention, you're looking at net retention, potential pipeline building, if there's advocacy in the right way, that kind of thing. What does that look like? So translate it in to revenue and what that means, whether it's loss and how that would affect the company, or we say, these are the opportunities, and I'm going to forecast that represents a 2% increase in gross retention if we do X and Y. So I think you just have to be really, really kind of sharp about how you put that together. Sorry, there's a helicopter flying outside. I don't know if you can hear it.
No, we can't hear it.
Okay, but I think you really have to tie that back. So again, for example, using what I did last summer, we had 2 potential opportunities and 1 risk. And the one big risk came from one of our biggest clients that had they churned, that would have not only tanked the quarter, but would have put a dent in the whole year. That would have been kind of hard to come back from. So what does that mean? And what does that look like? And, not just to our head of revenue for the US, but to my CFO, as they're trying to look at the budget. And then again, opportunities, if we follow through and have X and Y, what does that potential upgrade look like, or upsell, or even just the fact that we retain them for another year and increase their lifetime value. So I think you just have to understand your audience and pitch it in the language that it's going to resonate with them the most.
I don't want to monopolize. Alex, I don't know if you had.
I think you nailed it, Sherry. Like, I would basically say the same thing, which is tie it to dollars, because that's going to be the best language to speak within a company.
So the financial element, absolutely. Again, I couldn't agree more. And I would only add that in many cases, it's difficult to ask the rest of the company to change their plans, right? Like, support is building a process for X, or product is building a feature for Y. They have these plans because they're so smart and they know everything, right? The reality is, obviously, everything can be improved through customer feedback. So don't be afraid to start asking your customers for that feedback, because again, you can action it at the account level. This is one of the benefits of B2B versus B2C. We have a customer success organization that is designed to work and collaborate with customers. So, action it at the account level. Start to build what I would call representative and trustworthy feedback. Build up your database that shows it's not just a one-off, right? This is a recurring thing that we keep saying over and over again. And this is what's at risk. This is what the upside potential could look like, right? So some of the modeling that you can do, again, with these feedback tools can start to shine the light on that. And that should get people more excited, as long as we can tie it to the metrics that they care about. Like, marketing cares about new leads. Well, promoters drive new leads, right? Product wants take rates for new features. Well, right, if we know who those customers are that wanted them, right, that makes it easier to roll out and have betas, etc. Anyway, tie it to their needs. Show them how the feedback you're collecting fits into their existing KPIs.
And just a reminder, if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A. Use the Q&A window for those.
And I want to just, interrupt for 1 second, because again, to Steve said, and I know there is a question in the chat from Erin about focusing on feedback from customers versus from prospects. Well, prospects aren't paying you yet. Again, you want to talk in terms of the revenue you have. So that's one. But I would also say, do you have feedback from customers, and is there any direct correlation or similarity, like, from prospects? Because I think that could also be, hey, we're hearing this from the people that are keeping our lights on right now, but sales is trying to close deals and they're hearing similar things. So you can use prospect, especially if they're big logos, depending on what the goals of your company are, to help even validate that further. Like, you want to close these deals, it still has to tie back to revenue at the end of the day.
It does, but you can't prioritize prospects' requests over
100%.
over the feedback of your existing customer base. People who are existing customers, if that priority differs, you need to focus on your existing customer base. We've already 100%. Got them in the door, right?
Yes, but I think it could also help build a relationship with sales. We have information that will help you too. So it does help build some kind of internal relationship. I don't want to steer too far off course, but yes, I agree 100%. Prioritize your customers first.
No, I totally get that. I agree with you. But it's a fine line you're walking, right?
Yeah.
I mean, to Alex's point earlier, though, right? New young companies,
Yeah.
they're in high new prospect acquisition mode and understanding the competitive moat, Alex. So let me not speak for you, Alex.
No, I was actually going to say I'll take the other stance, which is it depends on where you're at as a company and what's going to have a bigger impact. So I would say in some cases it is more important, and that's hard to maybe stomach as a CS leader, but understanding what's going to have the bigger lift to the business because tying it to revenue. And also I would agree with what Sherry said, which is when you say customer feedback, I would also lump in prospect feedback to that too. Maybe it's not as important, but it's still another piece of information you can use to make a decision. So if you're capturing, I think one thing we haven't talked about yet is what is customer feedback? Feature requests, surveys, interactions you have with customers. But I think a piece of that too is, things like lost deal reasons, stuff like that. Because if you can look at ranking all of your, let's call it feature requests or, NPS comments, and then say, okay, well, it's this big. Now what happens if we add on prospects? Maybe that actually makes a decision for you because there's something that has a bigger overlap between customers and prospects.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the what. Let's keep going on the kind of the what, right? We talked about the why, right? Now let's talk about the what, right? So we got customer feedback, NPS, surveys, ad hoc feedback. What else do you think about? What else do you consider that feedback? I'm sure Steve's going to have something to say.
I have to jump in because yes, in all that feedback, there's one element that is in common across all of them that many companies forget about or skip, and that is root cause. So sales wants to know, for example, what do our promoters love? What's the root cause of that? What do our detractors hate, right? What's the root cause of that? So again, if it's a feature request, get to the root cause. Why are they asking for that? Simple framework that I can kind of explain for acquiring root causes does not need to be complex, but don't go to product or marketing or sales or anybody's support with problems. We need to go with here's what's really going on. Here's what's causing that. Let's work out the solution together.
So the context behind the ask.
Exactly. What did they, and it's a simple thing, right? Root cause is really nothing more than what did they expect and what did they get, right? So, and you can flavor it with, well, why did they expect what they expected, right? So if they expected something, right, where did that expectation come from? Did it come from sales? Did it come from marketing? Did it come from a competitor? Right. So it's really easy to just ask hey, I understand you're not happy with our support response time. What would you have expected instead? And what did you actually experience? Why did you expect that? Anyway, those are the kind of questions that really will start to engage the rest of the company.
Yeah, that's where you kind of use techniques like the 5 whys. Help me understand why this is important to you. Help me understand why you got to this point. But I think it's important that you talked about context a few times, but it's also equally important that once you've gathered that root cause, once you've established the context for the ask, that and you touched on this a few minutes ago, is that we are communicating with those internally in a language that they're going to care about and that they're going to understand. If I'm going to marketing and saying our customers don't think that, because a customer says they were sold a bill of goods, we need to frame that in the right way, in a way that marketing is going to be receptive to the feedback.
Exactly. Yeah. And
so it's not as simple as just collecting the the commentary from the customer and blasting it out to everybody. It's a little more, it's more nuanced than that.
I feel like a lot of that is sort of, look, everybody should read customer verbatims and understand what's going on, right? And understand, right? So, but it is time consuming. And not everybody has that kind of time investment. The easier we can make it for the rest of the business, the more likely they are to be able to listen to you, right, as the customer advocate.
Out of curiosity, for Sherry, Steve, Andrew, how do you see as far as do you bucket the types of feedback differently? Do you organize them differently? So one thing I see is there's customer feedback, but that could be a feature request. That could be an interaction, just like we did a QBR and someone said they didn't like this. Surveys, I don't know, bug reports, things like that. Do you see those as different buckets that you manage? You see that obviously it's all under customer feedback, but I'd be interested to see how how we group and analyze and review those.
I think it's important to bucket them first because it can get overwhelming. So let me speak, I'll be more specific. So for example, like I said, when I was at Searchmetrics, in terms of feature requests, they instituted some software in a new system where it was customers could search to see what other people requested and upvote it, or they could enter it, which is again going to help product. They could see what people were looking for the most. And also why, because that could also be something for CS. Are they asking for things that we have and they're not aware of? So there's a lot of other opportunity in that. Using Zendesk, if that's your support tool, can you aggregate that data to see the types of things people are asking, right? And the types of personas or even industries, right? The different segments of your business, because you might see patterns among the people or the companies or whatever that they're asking. And is there now something that a different department, whether it's CS or not, can help that? So I personally, when I'm looking at the different types of feedback, it's one thing to look at it as a whole and aggregate, but then I'd like to look at it again if we understand the persona, because I think that's important. And again, the segment and then even the industry, because then you might see patterns. And then depending on who else you might need to lean on internally with other stakeholders, like for marketing, maybe it's customer marketing and we need to have something that goes out to the executives that's different. We're seeing something for end users. So there's a different way, depending on what you're getting, there's different needs, but I do think it's important to bucket it so that you can uncover patterns amongst the data.
I couldn't agree with you more. I would bucket based off of the type of feedback that we were getting. Is it an enhancement request? Is it a bug? Is it a relationship issue? Is it what have you? I would do the same thing. I would look at it based off of the persona. That was super important, especially when I was looking at a single company and I had, say, key stakeholders who are farther away from the product that are giving us rave reviews. Because they have a good relationship with the account executive, but the boots on the ground, are giving us an NPS score of a 4. I'm like, that's there's a huge discrepancy there. And then I would also segment it by the areas of the company that the feedback is related to. And I would actually do that because when I was in smaller companies, what I would do is I would come to e-staff and I would say, hey, head of engineering, I've got a group of customers I need you to call because this is the feedback that they're giving us. And part of us being customer centric means that you need to hear from them firsthand. And we need to follow up with these customers so they know that their feedback is actually being heard. So I would have a set of people for a set of contacts for engineering to call, a set of contacts for sales to call, a set of contacts for marketing to call. So I stratify it that way as well. And also by stratifying it that way, it gave me the ability to convey the feedback, especially trends that I'm finding in the feedback, in the right way to that individual. Back to the point of let's make sure that we are messaging in a relatable way to these folks.
Yeah, it goes back to context, right? Yeah. So what is that context? And I always like, I guess my default going in assumption is start with your ICP. So companies are famous for, we're going to focus across the board, right? Yeah. That's not a recipe for success for a lot of companies. So what is that ideal customer target that we're going after from a sales and marketing perspective? And then once we acquire them, how are those accounts performing? How are those accounts feeling? Is our ICP happy and successful? Oh God, if not, then we better focus there, right? Or in some way.
Yeah. How about Alex, you got anything to add, or should we start answering some questions?
I think we can jump into questions. I think the only other thing that I was going to mention as you're kind of naming like all the ways you want to analyze or all the criteria you want to add on to that feedback or the context is also just the where they sit in the journey. And Steve, you had mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
But that was the only thing I felt like we didn't touch on, which is sure, it's like, what's the user type? What's the segment? All that other stuff. But also like, hey, are they in onboarding? Are they in renewal? Or where do they sit in the life cycle?
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, let's get some questions. You know what, Steve, I was waiting for you to say that you wanted to answer this one. The one that's at the top of the list. I'm just sitting there waiting, going, why hasn't Steve clicked answer live yet? Gary, thanks for the question. Gary asks, prevailing thought is that NPS is becoming outdated and obsolete. What would be the best alternatives to get better feedback? All right, Steve.
Well, okay, I'll start with two thoughts. First of all, I'm not sure that it's the prevailing thought. I mean, we do regular research in the space, and CEOs are still enamored with NPS.
Is this somebody calling your baby ugly? Is it?
Yeah. Well, but I would say it should be Net Promoter System, not Net Promoter Score. Okay. So what would be better alternatives to get better feedback? First of all, I would say the 2-question NPS survey. Look, we've done so many A/B tests around questionnaire length, looking for dropouts, looking for response rates. And so McKinsey and Company actually published an article on this just about a month or two ago. And they confirm, and so I think we can believe McKinsey says this, the participation of an individual respondent is almost entirely based on whether they think the feedback is going to go anywhere or do anything, or that the company is going to listen. So I'm going to go back to my Oprah quote, right? She says, I interviewed 30,000 people, and all 30,000 have one thing in common. They all want to be heard. So you throw a survey invitation over the wall. Yeah, we've all been trained that this is bullshit, that it's not going to go anywhere. So the best way to do it is to make sure that you've got a commitment. What's in it for the customer to want to respond and give you feedback? Now, this is a survey example. Any of the other types of feedback that we've been talking about, same thing. Like, I'm not going to file that feature request because it never goes anywhere, right? Got to have the what's in it for me, and there's got to be a certain level of commitment. And when you have that closed loop, to your point, Andrew, about repeating back to customers about what you did and how you heard or how you're addressing it, you're right. Now you've got such strong relationships. They're going to be much more likely to respond. You get much higher engagement. You got all the benefits that go with that.
Yeah, whatever methodology you use, if you're not closing the loop with your customer, and they feel like they're being heard, then it's all for naught.
That's right. Like, why do it? Why treat your customers like lab rats because we just want to know a score? Like, you're gonna set an expectation. Here's another important point. We've done this research over time to look at companies that truly are acting on feedback versus companies that, like, not so much, right? What we call the believers versus the achievers, right? And the achievers are, right, the people who are really acting on customer feedback are by and far not just increasing response rates, which is actually the really key metric here to look at, but also, driving more advocacy in the marketplace, having that relationship ease, removing the sand from the Vaseline, right? All the good things that come with that.
Get the sand out of the Vaseline. I'm just, we're gonna dive deeper into that towards the end of our session.
We'll do that. So I would say, the best alternatives. Look, I happen to like questionnaires because you collect data directly from the horse's mouth. Right, that you're getting direct customer feedback. And if you can't get your customer contacts to give you 2 minutes to fill out like 10 questions, that's all it is, right? So if you say it's going to take you 2 minutes and we're committed to acting on it, and if they won't give you feedback, then we know there's a problem. So your response rate is super important. And when you get a silent account, those folks are already checked out. Right? If they will not participate, then there's a reason why, right? They don't care. They're already checked out. So prevent that.
That's something that when you and I talked, I learned from you, because I, once again, thought that and the beauty of the NPS was the 2 questions and it would lead to high response rates. But you corrected me and said, hey, actually you can have probably 5 or 10. It really depends on what you're doing. Follow that up, right?
Yeah. Respect the customer's time.
Exactly. Sherry, Alex, you got anything to add?
No, I was going to say
Steve's idea. You think Steve's outdated? I mean, sorry, NPS is outdated.
I'm not a fan of NPS for a lot of reasons, but mostly because I think people don't deploy it in a way that's going to give them the information that they need.
Yeah.
And that's we need a whole webinar for that, I feel like.
People forget that when we did the research and established NPS around the recommend question and everything, we had a very deliberate sampling strategy, right? There was science to it. We didn't just blast out surveys and see what came back, right? There is some science to it. Now, in B2B, it's easier because you can more easily identify the contacts and have that level of engagement and follow up.
Right. But I think it goes back to, what are you looking to learn? Because NPS is not a marker of retention or not in general. And people are looking at it like, for example, and again, I feel like we could have a whole other webinar for this one, but for example, they're like, oh, look at all these people that gave us the detractors, the ones and twos, but they focus just on that. And what they're missing out is, and I know Steve will like this one, is what about all the people that didn't respond at all? That's where that is your churn risk, because the people that gave you the ones and twos, you forget they're still engaged enough to tell you your baby's ugly. And that is a big deal. Yeah. So, again, that's just a small part of it. I think you have to, again, it's the failure to plan. And just like, I was going to answer somebody's question, but what's your objective and what are you looking to learn? And then go from there, and what's your plan what are you going to do with the data afterwards? And that is a huge piece.
Sherry,
of it.
I love that. And then I always hear from people that says, well, we don't really know what the feedback is, so we can't commit to following up. And I'm like, okay, you're kind of married, right? The customer has married you. Maybe you haven't married the customer, but they kind of married you by buying your technology. Imagine you're sitting with your spouse and you have no interest in understanding if they're happy or unhappy, right? I mean, I just couldn't imagine doing it. Of course you want to know if your spouse is happy or unhappy. And because there's an expectation that you're going to kind of do something with it, right? So, I think this excuse of we don't know what we're going to get, so we can't commit, well, then you're just never going to listen to customers.
I have horror stories of having those discussions with CEOs. I'm like, what?
And then the score, like you'll sit in a meeting and they'll be like, look, last quarter our score NPS was 34, and this one it's 41, and everyone's clapping, but no one knows why the hell that even happened. Why did it improve? No one knows. They're just looking at this. Yeah.
And it's different accounts and contacts. So you've got, so statistically it probably didn't improve. Statistically, the market, right? So, they're focused on.
You just had a few more people answer. You just got lucky. Really? Yeah, you just got lucky, right?
And I'll add one more thing. If you're deploying it in-app, which can be great for getting people in the moment, you're also only ever going to be focused on the end users, and your budget holders and your executive sponsors are not in there. They're not in the tool every day. So you're missing an entire cohort of people that you want their feedback. So
for sure. But once again, the key is your customers need to feel like their feedback matters, right? That we're hearing them. And that was always, and even though I was not trained in NPS or the methodology, just something that I felt was really important about doing this activity when my CEO at the time said, hey, I want you to do this NPS thing, was the follow-up, was looking at what we got and making sure that I had people going and reaching out to these customers and saying, I need you to follow up with these folks, even if it's just for you to listen to them. Spend 15 minutes on the phone and hear them, listen to them.
Just by showing up,
exactly.
Right? You're strengthening the relationship. You're demonstrating.
Yeah, that's my favorite use of NPS, is actually just like an outreach trigger. Not like, the scores can change. There's all these reasons why you can look at it, but just, hey, if someone gives us a comment, or depending at the scale of company, detractor, promoter, whatever, just reach out to them and learn more. Yeah. Because that's closing the loop, maybe not on resolving, but at least acknowledging.
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's emotion, right? So Sherry, you keep emphasizing, and I'm so glad you do. What are you trying to learn, right? And so often it's like, well, our CEO needs a score for the board, or something to that effect. And again, you're treating your customers like lab rats, and you're not being proactive in using the feedback. If you're just listening to the score and using it as, look how great we're doing, or let's see how good we're doing, then again, I go back to the marriage thing. Imagine you ask your spouse for feedback and then you didn't say a word. I won't, right? Imagine you asked like, hey, you seem a little off today. Everything okay? And your spouse tells you the answer and then you walk away. Like, what? Right?
Ouch.
What? Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
that's an I don't care.
Well, and NPS is hot. Like boards are saying they want it, and then the CEO has to get it, and there's all this stuff going on. But a lot of times, boards and I'll even say the CEO, they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
So as CS leaders, you could also help to sort of educate and put things in front of them that are going to matter. That is part of your job. So that's a big part of it too. Like oftentimes the CEO is just like, okay, you want NPS? Now we have to, and then all of a sudden the next time you hear in a leadership meeting, we need NPS, but no one knows, like no one really knows why. I don't even think some of the times the board knows why.
Yay, we got an NPS. And I asked 3 of my closest customer relationships, will you please give us 10s on this? And now we have an NPS of 100 that we get to report to the board.
Right.
Come on.
It should be more. It's not a vanity metric, right?
Shouldn't be.
Awesome. We got definitely have more questions, and just a reminder, folks. We go till 15 past the hour, so if you can stick around, we will continue to answer questions as long as possible. Gary, thank you for the question. Steve, if you can hit done on that. We have one question here about the donkey with the toilet plunger in. Even a workhorse can be a unicorn. That's the meaning behind our logo. Let's see. Paige, thank you for the question. Paige asks, how do you prioritize which feedback are needed to be actioned first? And it looks like Steve wants to jump in on this out of the gate as well. Steve, what do you got to say to Paige?
Yeah, well, so Sherry, you talked a lot about financial linkage. That helps, but there's also some simple statistical techniques. Again, if you're using a reasonable voice of customer platform, not just a survey tool, but a platform that they'll do these things that will show you
like Topbox?
Statistically, that they will show you which things are going to be the biggest bang for the buck, right? Just because something scores low doesn't mean that it's going to have the same impact that addressing something else could have. And I would also say, you don't have to only focus on the negative. One of my favorite books, is called Switch. Go check it out. It's all about change management.
It's a great book. Yeah,
great book. Focus on bright spots. What's working really well, and why, and how do we replicate that across the customer base?
Yeah, awesome. Sherry, Alex, anything to add?
I don't have I think it totally depends, what you prioritize first, but I think to be able to prioritize, you just need to make sure you're capturing the context and the characteristics of who's submitting the feedback, because the answer might be different for every company, depends on what you're trying to achieve, but giving yourself the ability to analyze the feedback based off of segment, customer journey, user type, like all that stuff is probably more important to me. Is give me the ability to make that analysis, and then I'll figure out my priority.
Yeah, that kind of overlaps with Brandon's question, right? How do you prioritize the feedback you get? You do get on a deeper level than which customer or which type of customer.
Yeah. I'll give a specific answer to this of something I'd done before. Early on, we managed a bunch of feature requests. We managed a bunch of feature requests as a Google form that dumped into a Google Sheet. And the Google form could either be filled out by CSM or the end users. We kind of tried to funnel everything into one place. So all we really got from that was who submitted it, what their description was or what they were asking about for their feature, and then a self-selection on like the criteria. Or the category of what they're asking. So then what we tried to do is we tried to append as many things to that as we could. So we just tried to add, what's the plan type? What's the user type? Where in their journey are they? What's their health score? What's our categorization of what they asked for? What's their revenue? What's their segment, industry? company side, like all that information typically exists in your CRM. So being able to understand who asked the question and append all that information gave us the ability to do all that analysis I was talking about. So we were able to identify, we did the same thing with NPS. In NPS, hey, this role type in our product has way lower NPS than everyone else. Like, oh, that's an opportunity for us. Or it was, hey, we've decided as a company we want to do better in this industry. Let's go look at the feature requests for that industry and see like how does that change things. So how do you go on a deeper level than which customer or like which type? Think of all the information that lives in your CRM that you typically gather for sales. That's useful information when it comes to analyzing your customers and their feedback. So it's where they stand on the journey, information about their company, information about their use case, persona, role, title, all that kind of stuff. Anything you can just jam in there.
Anything to add, Steve, Sherry? Awesome. Steve, Alex, can you hit done on those two questions, please? Let's see here. Chris asks, how can I more effectively communicate the voice of the customer to management that doesn't share the same value in the feedback that is shared? Thanks for the question, Chris. That's a tough one.
That's a tough one. I mean, look, if you can't get your CEO or a leadership team to want to start with this, I usually, and there's a question also about this later on, like how do you get started? I like to start with what I call kind of a coalition of the willing. You're in customer success. You're certainly willing, right? Because you understand the benefits that feedback and acting and addressing feedback can have. And by the way, I use the word addressing feedback because you can't necessarily do everything. I don't think you want to set the expectation we're going to do everything that you want that customers say, right? But you can always close the loop and address it. So I would start with that kind of mindset. Like, okay, if we ask the question, we might not get an answer we want to hear, but we can always at least reset expectations, or we can always, explain what's going on and provide workarounds, address it in some way. Now, that said, though, this whole idea of addressing feedback means that you've probably got to have that coalition of the willing. In customer success, who is the right person to address a feedback item around support? It might be success, but then again, it might be better to come from support. So at kind of the manager and director level, who wants to do this? Who's interested in listening? Get your little team together and then go out and look. You don't have to use fancy voice of customer tools to get started. Like Alex was talking about a Google Sheet. Put together some questions that you want to ask, and you've got your coalition of the willing that are committed to listening and following up to address it. Now you're starting to get some feedback. Now you're starting to understand what's working and not working in a very small way. Bring that to your CEO, right? Your CEO might be very reluctant to do a big, right? They're thinking about surveys and these blasts. But if we can just say, look, we did this small pilot, we went to 10 accounts, here's what we learned from these people. I think your CEO is probably going to say, wow, we should do more of that.
Yeah, but I think and Chris actually followed up his initial question with some more clarity. For instance, a department that may receive more negative feedback who becomes defensive rather than concentrate on the root cause and ends up focusing on excuses. I totally can empathize with this. I've experienced this personally.
All the time. But, we're not living in the customer's shoes. So if the customer says, I hate your support, then it's up to the CSM to get to that root cause. Well, tell me, what did you expect? Why? What did you experience? Why? Right? What was that all about? What's the positive or negative gap? And then, now your support person shouldn't be defensive. You can say, look, this is what happened. And this is what they're expecting instead. So what do you think about getting there? Now, your support person might say, it's a one-off. We don't have that, right? But feedback is going to tell you if it's a one-off, right?
And I think it's important, though, to keep in mind, if you're in that situation, that it's not just about what you're saying, it's how you're messaging it, right? So you sometimes see people put up defenses because we we are tone deaf when it comes to the empathy part of this, right? Just taking that step back and thinking about, okay, how would I feel in this person's position, receiving this message, and is there some way that I can change the way I'm messaging it so it lands better?
Yeah.
I'll say two things here. One, I think in general, in terms of Steve, what you said about, managing expectations, I think that's CS's job along the entire life cycle at all times. Like, one of the things that I used to do was, have gut checks every so often, reset expectations. Where are we? What's going on? So I think that is important. It doesn't just happen after onboarding or after an EBR or a QBR. I think that's something that needs to happen throughout, throughout the journey in general. So that's number one, and asking the right questions. And I do think, to your point, Andrew, messaging is also important, right? Having empathy and how we address things. But I also want to be careful that sometimes, people react based on their own lived experiences. So sometimes, it may never land. No matter what you do, it may never land, right? And that's a whole other situation. Yeah. But I just want to make sure to mention that, because I don't want people to contort themselves into knots over it. But having compassion for the other, for what other people experience, is also incredibly important.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's always going to, that it's always going to land. Right. But you at least put forth a little bit of effort to try and message something in a relatable way. Right. That's the best we can do.
You want to make it about the customer and not about the support person, using that as example. It's not about them.
Exactly. We want to take the emotion out of this and just stick to the facts. And to your point, Steve, maybe it is a one-off thing, but what if it's a consistent, hey, I'm seeing this consistently. That's one of the things I learned early on, is just because one person says, hey, I don't like this, doesn't mean you have a problem. My dad used to tell me, if one person says you're drunk, you might not be drunk. If two people say you're drunk, well, you might not be drunk, but you might be. If three people are telling you you're drunk, you're probably drunk. Right?
Your dad's had a lot of wisdom, Andrew, I have to say.
Yeah. You heard that. You listened to that podcast that I did with Miranda, didn't you? Yeah. You should have heard what he said when I got fired from McDonald's.
You're drunk.
Let's Chris.
You might be drunk.
Yeah, I was definitely drunk. Anna, so we kind of talked about this. Alex, you had some great ideas around, starting simple with Google Sheets and Google Forms. Let's say you're a smaller company, just starting to collect feedback in an organized way. How do you start? Now, hopefully Anna will listen to the recording, because it looks like she's left us. But any additional thoughts, ideas, best practices, suggestions on how to get going, especially if you don't have the availability of a more formal VOC tool like Topbox or whatever tools are out there. How do you get started?
This was the one I wanted to take.
Yeah, for sure. The one that you wanted to jump in and answer. I'll
just jump. I think we'll probably all have things here. I know Steve alluded to something before. I think Alex, you did as well. But I think it goes back to one of the things I said in the very beginning is, what do you want to learn? And I don't think it matters whether you're small or large. You have to have a goal. And again, a lot of times it fails because there is no objective. There's no proper planning. I think if you want to get started, what is it that you want to learn, right? And if you're sitting in a roundtable with other stakeholders, this is something you want to decide. What are your goals for the year, for H1, for H2, depending on where you are. And then you can kind of plan around what those goals are, so that you can also be really specific about the type of feedback you want to gather and how you're going to deploy it. But I think it's still going to start with proper planning, but what do you want to learn? And what are you going to do with that feedback? And what decisions will you make or validate from it? I still think it goes back to those things. It doesn't matter.
Alex, what do you got to add, being the small company guy?
I totally agree. If you don't have a reason to use feedback or goal for what it's going to be, like you're shooting yourself in the foot. After that, I would say tactically, kind of the 5 steps or 5 things I would do is make sure you have an organized way to capture and acknowledge it. That could be something as easy as, like I said, a form that you give your customers. Hey, fill this out. just something that's organized that is a single entry point. Make sure you acknowledge it. Even closing the loop doesn't mean solving someone's problem. It can also just mean acknowledging their feedback.
Exactly.
Then I'd have a way I would organize or process it. This is manual, but I think it's really key to, if you're gathering a bunch of feedback, you need to in some way organize it, categorize it. My recommendation is get with let's just say it's depending on if it's feature requests, your product team, if it's NPS, your management team, and figure out how are we going to categorize this. Or for features, come up with the shared language of product. All right, here are the 20 different feature or areas of the product we're going to categorize. So that part I think is actually super critical, is enriching and categorizing. And then figure out what's your review cadence and how you're going to utilize it, which you should have done with your goals. Are you going to look at it every week? Are you going to do it every couple weeks? And then what are the decisions you're going to make? And then also, as you start to process or use that information and make decisions, close the loop with your customers. So, if it's something that got fixed, let them know. If it's a feature that came out, let them know. Even if it's something that got added to the roadmap, let them know. So
let them know you're listening, right?
Yeah. Let them know. So I'd start simple with, a form, a Google Sheet, an Airtable, your CRM, and then I would just make sure that you're consistently processing and organizing and using it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Andrew, do you mind if I jump in with one of the questions?
Of course I don't mind, Steve. It wouldn't matter if I minded. You jump in anyways.
Because one of my favorite, there's a question here about, the customer wants to do this in a meeting, right? Not fill out forms or submit stuff. So one of my favorite motions around this is, first of all, like the meeting is a good thing, right? You want to drive that alignment, but we like the idea of a little bit of homework. Like, hey, we're going to have this joint success planning meeting coming up next month. In order to make sure we're focused on solutions, not on problems in the meeting, I need you to take 2 to 3 minutes to fill out this short questionnaire that will make sure I really understand what's working and not working, what your perceptions are. And by the way, I'm asking for that feedback from all these other people as well. Are these the right people? Are there other people we should include, right? And then right now we're really getting a sense of what's working and not working from the customer's perspective. You can go into that meeting with something more valuable. That's the first thing. The second thing is you can say, yeah, I know you've told me all this stuff before. I know that I'm your customer advocate, and it'll really be helpful for me to be able to advocate for you if I can get your voice captured in this system so that my team knows that it's straight from the horse's mouth, right? That it's not being translated and manipulated by a customer success person. It'll only take 2 minutes, right? Will you participate? Get them to say yes, they'll participate. They will. You'll get a lot out of it.
This is Musfira's question.
Yes.
That you're referring to. Awesome. Thanks, Musfira, for that question. If you can hit done on that. Totally agree. Sherry, Alex, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah. I think the question was like, hey, they'd rather, instead of sending the survey, do it in person.
Yeah.
I think that's great to gather the in-person feedback. In fact, it's like one of the best ways to do it, to dig deep, like the 5 whys. You can't really do that in a survey.
Yeah.
One thing I would cautious though is watch out for the bias of like doing it in person. People are a lot less likely to call your baby ugly to your face. So
True.
I would continue to do surveying to be able to balance that. And this actually goes to, as far as customer feedback, one thing we haven't talked about is like customers who are leaving and their feedback. We found that the sentiment, or like we would always survey churning customers, and they'd give us the reasons. It was basically always, hey, it's me, not you type of feedback. And then if we asked them again a couple months later, it was always, hey, it's you, not me. Like, that was one big thing we noticed that shifted, is they were a lot nicer to our face, or like right when they were trying to leave, than if they did it not anonymously, but if they did it via a survey, after a while. So my caution then is just don't only do it in meetings, balance the two, because you might get different answers.
I think that's what Steve, you're reiterating what Steve is saying. It needs to be a balance, and Steve's approach, I think, is a great approach.
Yep.
To kind of
Steve's really smart, and I like to copy what he says as my own. I'll tell everyone I came up with that, though. If they ask.
Okay. I think we got time for one more question. Unless Sherry, you got anything to add to this, or you want to jump in on this?
No, not now.
Okay,
I'll
good.
just whatever
Right.
Steve says.
Good, but yeah, well, exactly. Okay.
No, whatever Alex says.
Just warning you, Alex wants to jump in on this one first. So Haley asks, what would you say best practices to consult with your product team first before conducting questionnaire surveys, et cetera, as far as how to close the feedback loop, making sure we actually have a way to close that customer feedback loop? How can this be approached from a CS to product in a way that might work well for product?
And actually, if one of you want to jump in first, I kind of talked about this a little while ago. So share if you wanted to jump first.
So let me speak from my experience too, specifically. Product, if in my experience, going to them first, they can often want to get involved, and then there's too many people happening and a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and then they kind of try to commandeer. So if you're looking to gain feedback, again, we're going back to where we talked about in the beginning with product feedback, I still think a questionnaire or some kind of where you're gathering sentiment is important. And then again, putting that into buckets, by different personas and, maybe different parts of your software or different issues, and then be able to share that in a way, in a language that resonates with them. Do you know what the roadmap looks like? What are their goals for this quarter? Or, talk to them. It still ties back to revenue, but you may not be talking to them about dollars and cents. Again, what do they have planned? You should know the internal roadmap. What does that look like? What are they reporting as meeting their goals? So how does this help them meet their goals? How does this help them re-strategize for the next quarter or the back half of the year or wherever you are, to maybe include some of these things? Hey, this is what we're hearing from all of these customers, and that is going to help them think about it. And maybe the closing the loop in that sense could be, maybe you facilitate a call with the customer and the product team if it's something a little bit bigger and they want to dive deeper. And that's another way to close the loop. It's showing the customer not only you heard them, but now they have a direct line to someone in product so they can speak more specifically.
Yeah. Sherry, you said two things throughout this that's so important here. So I'm going to quote Sherry, which is, first of all, know what you're trying to get, right? What's the objective here, right? Because if you want product feedback, then you're going to go to end users and you're going to ask them really specific sort of product questions. But the second thing Sherry said is, things like NPS and these kinds of feedback mechanisms are not just about the product, they're about the experience, right? The product is a piece of the overarching experience, but how, right? Look, if the product could do everything, then we wouldn't need customer success, I guess, right? But I think there's an experience component that goes along with this. So, I usually like to start broad, asking some questions about overall sentiment. Why are they seeing value? Are we helping with, contribute to success? There's some of the emotional components. There's also some of the experiential components like, product overall, support overall, right? But anyway, as you start to filter in those questions, having first defined what it is you're trying to learn and who you need to get that feedback from, right? What persona or what types of accounts, then you can start thinking about, okay, what are the questions we're going to ask? And it may not just be product, right? And that coalition of the willing probably is going to include some other people that should be involved in listening and addressing what your customers are saying.
Alex, any final words before we wrap up?
I agree with both of what Sherry and Steve said. If it's relevant to product specifically, then at that point, what I like to do and would have done in the past is not work with them to facilitate the program, like Sherry said. They may want to be involved, but more go to them to make sure that we have a shared language on how we're categorizing or interpreting. An example being, hey, if we're going to categorize these feature requests into buckets, work with product to come up with that list that you'll use. Because that will get buy-in from product. They're more likely to learn or listen. It's kind of like tie things to dollars. Well, hey, tie it to someone else's language and the way they talk about something, and you'll get a lot more buy-in. So I would just, say I agree with what they both said. And I've found in my experience, it's worked successfully when you go with to product with a way to put it into their language, because then they're much more receptive, and it's a lot easier then to action that feedback.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're at the end of our time for today. I think it was a great conversation. I expected a great conversation, especially based on our pre-call on Monday, but it's not what I think, it's what all of you think. So please let us know by posting your feedback on LinkedIn and tagging either myself or our guests or Success Coaching. I want to thank my amazing panelists for spending the time with us today, for your ideas, thoughts, insights, and best practices that you shared, and getting the sand out of the Vaseline. One final note, great CSMs know that they don't have all the answers, but they know where to get them. That's why we created this series, to harness the knowledge and experience of the community to help improve everyone. We hope to see you again at our next event on March 23rd, when we'll discuss leveraging your customer advocates with Jeff Justice Williams from Box, Josh Zamora from ServiceNow, and Natalie Ryerson from Magnitude Software. Until then, make sure to make space for yourself and your mindset every single day. Have a great rest of your day, week, and month, everybody. See you soon.